Welcome to the Resource People podcast, presented to you by Australian Resources and Energy Group AMA. The Resource People podcast brings to life the stories behind the people, workforces and companies of our great industry.
Welcome to Resource People podcast. I'm Tara Diamond from AMA, and we have a cracking episode for you today where I got to have a chat with Minister Keith Pitt, the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia in the Coalition Government. We have a fantastic chat about what he calls as a wild ride. We cover the national resources sector workforce strategy. We talk about what's happening in the industry. Of course, we touch on the pandemic, what his priorities are in the portfolio at the moment, some recent announcements, some general policy chat, and then some things about challenges and opportunities and how the industry and the government are pushing forward in those areas. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Resource People podcast, Minister Pitt.
Hey, great to be with you.
Well, I really want to get started by giving us an opportunity to hear about your background and your journey to becoming Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia in early 2020.
Well, it's a bit wild, I've got to tell you. I'm an electrician by trade and followed that with a degree in engineering at QT. I've had cane farms and small business. I was a registered professional engineer. I've had a registered training organisation, whole stack of things actually, and found my way into politics in 2013 under Tony Abbott when the coalition won government. Been fortunate enough to hold some junior ministerial positions, and now I find myself in the cabinet as the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia. I think I'm the only tradie in the cabinet, and I think I'm the only one that went to public school.
Well, what a good pedigree to be able to bring to not only cabinet but to your portfolio. You've been in the role for over a year now. Any reflections on the last 15 months serving as Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia? I have to say, we always feel very fortunate in Resources and Energy because we've been very well served by ministers in the portfolio. So we'd love to hear your reflections.
Oh, look, I think the first one is about the industry itself. The sector has just done a phenomenal job. Our forecast is Australia will break all records for exports of resources and energy this financial year. And given that it's a worldwide pandemic, we've had economies that have closed down for months. It's just a phenomenal result. And that's off the back of the hard work of the men and women in the sector. They've done what they had to do. A lot of them moved their families. Many of them have all been away for months. Their swings and rosters have changed, and I'm just very appreciative of what they've done to make sure they drag their industry, their jobs, their companies, and the country through the pandemic. And it's been a wild ride, but we got it done.
Absolutely. And I want to get on to some of your focuses and priorities in the role, but I really want to pick up on something you just touched on, because we know that the majority of the sector has kept operating, managing the challenges, as you've mentioned, of the pandemic, and really continuing to play such a significant role for the economy. Our exports are being forecast to hit a record 296 billion for 2020-21, which is, as you say, such a strong display of the industry's resilience. But it hasn't been all big dollars, big exports, people continuing to operate. Different parts of the sector have fared very differently throughout the pandemic. Would love to hear your unique perspective on the role the industry is currently playing and will continue to play for all Australians.
Well, firstly, they've kept the lights on at home, but they've also kept the lights on with our trading partners. Can you just imagine what would have happened in Japan or South Korea or other areas if Australia hadn't maintained not only supply, but its logistics chains? I mean, Japan without Australia's coal, South Korea without Australia's gas, it just would have been chaos. So it didn't happen by accident, I've got to say. It took a lot of work by all levels of government and companies and individuals, but most importantly, those hardworking men and women. I'm just so appreciative of the work that they've done, the commitments they've made, and they should be proud of their industry. They've got every right to be proud of it. They should ignore the activists that are out there calling on the demise of the resources sector. They're going from strength to strength. And in fact, our forecasts are that there'll be increased demand out to about 2030, particularly in Southeast Asia. So I expect to see more exports, more jobs and more opportunities.
Well, let's get on to focuses and priorities then. With the forecast that you have and the opportunities that you see, can you paint a picture for us in terms of your focuses and priorities for the portfolio?
Well, I mean, if we start with coal, the world outlook in our view, and certainly this is what's been reported elsewhere, is that out to 2030 we'll see increases in demand. That's good for Australia. We're positioned well. We have a quality product. We're very efficient in terms of the way that we deliver that product, and we're competitive in market. So I think there'll be even more jobs in the coal sector now. We're at levels which we haven't seen since 2012 right now. In those growth industries, in critical minerals, or whether that's in lithium or titanium or others, we think there's a real opportunity there to start to build in Australia some downstream processing, that downstream manufacturing, and we want to get closer to final product in Australia. So to do that, we need new markets, we need new investment. We certainly need some people to take some risks. We'll have to build some prototype facilities, and there's a lot of that work being done through the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office right now. We're clearly working with any number of trading partners around the world. And look, the announcement from US Department of Defence last year for the investment into lithium in Western Australia, I think is just one step on that journey. There's a lot of work underway, and I think that will help drive jobs in Australia.
Just picking up on that, and you just touched on the downstream process and manufacturing as a direction that we can go in terms of opportunities for the industry, but also broadly for Australia. Do you think the pandemic in some ways has accelerated some focuses in those areas?
Oh, look, I think it's certainly reset the views of some individuals in that we do need to have that sovereign capability in Australia. I mean, there's some very critical supply chains, which was obvious during the pandemic. That was going to be challenging. And of all things, the industry almost ran out of gloves and safety glasses. What a reason to have a problem.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a number of other critical elements, of course, but industry work well together. And as you know, it's a tough battlefield out there, particularly around trade. But the companies did work very closely together through the pandemic to make sure that we maintained operations. That was important in the scheme of things. But we do need to ensure that we have those opportunities in Australia. But to make that happen, the fundamentals of business don't change. You need to have a competitive power price. It needs to be reliable, affordable, dispatchable. You need to have a competitive gas price with the same things available. You need to have a skilled workforce. And of course, those individuals willing to put some of their hard-earned on the table to build that capacity. So we're certainly pushing towards that now.
And you touched on critical minerals, but I'd like to discuss some of the ways the coalition government is supporting the sector, and firstly to discuss the Junior Minerals Exploration Incentive. And you've just announced that the government will contribute a further $100 million to extend this already successful program. Can you tell us what the program means and the extension of the program for employers in the sector, and how it will help grow and support the industry and the community and the economy that it supports?
I always find it easy to call it the GEMI.
The
Junior Minerals, Junior Minerals Exploration Incentive. And it's actually a tax incentive. So it's $100 million over the next 4 years. And the junior explorers around the country, and about half of those are in Western Australia. It's about 600 people employed throughout that sector. They are so important in making sure that we do have a pipeline of projects across the country into the future. So the way it works is they can actually trade off those tax incentives to individuals or companies. They can be used as a franking credit, obviously, for a company. But we know that this is something that works. So the previous 3 rounds, about 70 million in those tax credits were issued. And that resulted in over $340 million worth of capital invested into the exploration sector. So they're out looking for the next big find. They're using work from Geoscience Australia and Exploring for the Future, which is another $225 million investment from the Commonwealth in terms of data and providing more opportunities for those exploration companies and miners to make decisions. We don't end up with a black hole in the industry. We absolutely intend to make sure that doesn't happen. And these types of investments are long-term investments that make a real difference in the future.
A fantastic announcement, and I'd have to comment on the acronym GEMI, because when I first saw that some time ago, I thought, isn't that prophetic for our industry? And then I did think, your last name's Pitt and my last name's Diamond. So between GEMI, Pitt and Diamond, we must be in the right industry.
Well, I'm the rocks and you're the diamonds. I think that's how it works, Sarah. These things just help support the industry, and I think it's been really warmly welcomed because it gives confidence. They know where they're going for the next 4 years. That ensures that more people can invest and all those individuals keep their jobs.
I want to actually get onto workforce in a moment because Emma's done some forecasting for the next 5 years, and your comment around keeping that pipeline of projects is obviously so critical to the country and, the stability of employment. Our industry is really marked by the cyclical nature of the markets and commodity prices. So the more the industry and government and all stakeholders can work together to smooth that out for a workforce perspective is really important. But before I get on to workforce, because I want to ask you quite a number of questions about that, there's been another really positive announcement for the sector, which is the $20 million for the Global Resources Strategy, which is a recent announcement of yours to help diversify exports and find new markets for Australian resources and technology. Can you tell us about that initiative?
Well, the Global Resources Strategy, $20 million, as you've said, and we're looking to ensure that we can continue to not only expand in our existing markets, but find new markets for Australia's exports from the resources and energy sector. I was in the trade portfolio for some time, and trade's about relationships. It's about the strength of those relationships and continue to build on them over time. And it's one of the reasons that other countries come to Australia for our exports, because they know we are reliable. No matter what happens, we deliver. And that matters. It really matters in terms of trade. So we want to expand those opportunities, because trade means jobs. More trade means more jobs, particularly in regional areas. I mean, 1 in 4 jobs in the regions relies on trade. So the more we can do in that space, the better it is for regional Australia.
That's such a great connection to employment. And as you know, and the listeners know, Emma's real niche and focus is on workforce. So I've got a number of things to talk to you about workforce, but I want to start with the National Resources Workforce Strategy that you released in February. Can you tell us about that strategy, the plans within the strategy, and how it will assist? Having that national strategy, that connected strategy, will assist to ensure the industry's workforce remains strong, innovative. As you said, we've always been reliable and innovative and really world leading in terms of how we operate, process and deliver.
I've got to tell you, as a broken down electrician, I've got a bit of a soft spot for all the tradies out there and all of the apprentices. As a kid, I had a sugar mill provide me an opportunity to go and do a trade. Probably wasn't as appreciative at the time as I should have been as to what happened. But I mean, that trade has led for me to have an opportunity to work my way through uni and pay my own way to down the track, help pay for your mortgage and your kids through school. And somehow found me as a cabinet minister in the Commonwealth, as a representative for the people of Hinkler. And look, I just want to see others get that same opportunity. I want to see more kids out there doing a trade, working in traineeships, getting those skills, because a trade teaches some really basic skills. It teaches you how to break down a problem, how to get to where you need to go, how to work with people, and more importantly, it does teach you how to respect and recognise the skills of others that work in these areas. That can be really difficult, and their skills can be really unique. You just don't find them anywhere else. So I'm really passionate about getting more Australian kids into jobs, particularly in the resources sector. I've been pretty strong with the sector's leadership about what I think they should be doing, and I've got to say they've responded. We've seen some really good announcements from BHP and Rio and others about how many more individuals they're looking to get on board and trained. And this is all part of the Commonwealth strategy to make sure that more kids are in jobs and the Australian workforce is out there filling the opportunities we have right now. And at the moment, the world's your oyster. There's a lot of jobs out there that need to be filled. There's a lot of technical and skilled jobs that need to be filled. And certainly the strategies we are putting in place. I mean, we've got over 100,000 apprentices getting support, whether it's through small to medium businesses. We've got commitments from the big boppers. And I really like what BHP is doing, I've got to tell you. And the more kids we get in, the more diesel fitters, the more electricians, then the more of those tradespeople fill those jobs into the future. And right now, they are the available workforce. So let's get them out in the field.
Absolutely. And the degree in which there are opportunities. People aren't aware of the fact that you could do your traineeship to become a chef in the resources industry. And, it really is quite diverse in terms of the number of opportunities there are for not just employment. You're such an amazing role model in that, where you get an opportunity to do one job and then you get opportunities to then really upskill and learn a number of different things. Emma leads the National Primary School program called Bright Future STEM, where we put industry role models in front of primary school kids and we do lots of hands-on activities. And the kids just love hearing from the trades and the engineers and all the people on site, and get an exposure to what actually happens in a resources and energy operation. There's quite a disconnect between those that understand the industry and the rest of the people that just turn the light on and don't know where it's come from. What are the main things in the strategy that will help deliver the things that you've just described in terms of your vision for what the industry can deliver for, employment and opportunities for Australians?
Well, firstly, it's about focus. We
Right.
need to ensure that we are filling those skilled areas where there's a shortfall. Look, I'll say to everyone's listening to your podcast, your skills are transferable. If you've been out and worked in the resources sector, whether that is in hospitality or administration, whether you're working in the workshop, those are all transferable skills to wherever you find yourself in life. So look, we're very focused on making sure that we are meeting those skills needs. Mercadia Cash and others have put significant amounts of money on the table so we can build that strategy. But it is most importantly about working with industry. Because at the end of the day, it's industry that's picking these kids up and making sure they get through. And the other piece that we've got to do more work on, in my view, is in the secondary system. So secondary education, we need more kids coming out with STEM. We need more with that science and physics and engineering type background, because that's where the work is. And I think industry has done a really good job to be out promoting the great benefits that it provides to the Australian people. I was on this show the other day. I'm not sure if you heard of it, called Q&A.
Oh,
And
yes.
I was getting beaten up.
Oh, dear.
Beaten up by a Green senator and a former prime minister, and I'm not sure where they think the resources come from to build all of these things, because I'm pretty confident they arrived in a train or a bus or a plane that was built from Australian resources. And if they want to use solar cells and wind turbines, well, they're coming from Australian resources too. So there's a good story to tell, and I think industry is out there trying to sell that story, but there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of activism. It's well funded. It's predominantly coming from international sources. And I think we need to stand up and push back. Our kids need to understand that they're not killing the planet. They're providing an opportunity that didn't exist. So, look, I'm passionate about making sure that we just get the facts on the table, the right messages. And as a result, we get more people working in the sector where right now there's a shortfall, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you commented on that disconnect that really is occurring in terms of people's understanding of actually how things operate in terms of getting resources and energy to be able to live our modern life, and what actually happens in terms of making that happen from an operational perspective, and the type of investment and the type of workforce and what that delivers for Australians. But you just touched on opportunity, and I want to come back to that, because in the strategy that you released in February, there were 3 key themes: opportunity, participation, and quality. I think you've touched on opportunity and participation, but what is the drive for quality? What is your focus in that area? What does that mean?
Well, it means that we're turning out, firstly, the right types of apprentices and trainees, that they're in the skills areas that are in demand, that need to be filled. And I think, look, the other message we need to get out there is that trades have changed. The technology's moved. The skills that you need now are very different to what you needed 30 and 40 years ago, even in my own apprenticeship. So much automation, so much work around things that are driven by electricity, for example, whether it's robotics, whether it's big data, whether it's an IT. It's such an extensive range of skills. So we need to turn out the people that we need and that the industry needs. As I said, there's always a lot of resistance to when we make some of these changes. But even last year, we made some announcements around university sector in terms of the costs for the particular courses. Now, yep, we need journalists and we need lawyers, but I've got to tell you, we need more engineers and more scientists and more technicians. These are the reasons that we are making some fundamental changes in terms of creating those university places, those short courses, supporting research, investing in work assistance programs and wage subsidies. And we've got to continue to get more regional and remote kids into those skilled areas.
I'm glad you touched on that forecast and the initiatives and, for lack of a better word, the levers that the government's been pulling to make sure that we are getting the people where we can in the areas that they're required. AMA published in late 2020 a 5-year workforce forecast for resources and energy, so mining and oil and gas and services. And it highlighted that if we're able to attract the investment that's in the pipeline for new operations and expansion of existing operations, the industry will require an additional 24,000 people. I know that this forecast was referenced in your strategy, but how do you work to ensure that as many levers and as many things that are happening, not necessarily even in your portfolio, are activated behind the strategy to align what we need, to your point about quality, the people being upskilled and educated in the areas that are required?
It's pretty straightforward. Money talks. I mean,
Mm.
we put $580 million on the table for a skills package. That is how we're funding these new university places and short courses. We've got $30 million. We've already invested $30 million establishing the Central Queensland Uni School of Mining and Manufacturing in Rocky and Gladstone. Some mining research centres, about $7 million for that in Sydney and Adelaide. So it is about making sure that we are funneling Commonwealth support into those areas of need. Look, I'm pleased you've raised your forecast because employment in the industry has actually increased through the pandemic. So you've got some 264,000 Australians now directly employed in the sector. That's up roughly 20,000 from 6 months ago, give or take. And that's good news.
I know, it's fantastic news in this environment.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Against all resistance, against all of those headwinds, against a worldwide pandemic, we have more people working in the sector than we did before. We're doing record numbers in terms of exports. We've got more kids coming in to do traineeships and apprenticeships. I just think the sector is going really well. We want to make sure we keep that momentum, and that's why the Commonwealth is continuing to make these investments, and they are significant.
I want to touch back on a couple of things that you've commented. You've commented a few times about the really strong headwinds and activism and community sentiment. And here we are with an industry that, as you said, have kept the lights on here, not just in Australia, but elsewhere in the world, and growing its workforce at the same time. Do you think that the industry is sometimes its own worst enemy in that it's so good at operating, it just gets on and does the job and doesn't spend a lot of time touting the work that it's doing?
Well, I think there's a bit of that. If you work in the industry, you think, how's it possible? People don't realise how important this is. But unfortunately, in the modern world, with social media, with well-funded activists, with international activism, who aren't terribly interested in facts, I've got to tell you, it's all about the noise. You need to be out there defending yourself. You've got to demonstrate that you need. A really easy example. We look at how many mining engineers, are enrolled in universities. Well, last year across the entire country, there were just 46. That would be the intake for one major employer in Australia every year. It's even worse in petrochemical, so offshore oil and gas. There were just 6. Now, given you've got probably a 50% loss rate through those engineering degrees, because they are difficult and very maths focused.
And it's very competitive. All of the other industries have some of the same sort of issues in terms of attracting engineers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so why aren't kids putting their hands up? Well, because for some reason they've been told or indoctrinated or taught that there's no future in the industry. Well, that's just complete nonsense. Absolute nonsense. So we've got to be out there defending ourselves. I do it every single day, every minute, every hour, because I'm really proud of the Australian industry and the people that work in it. And I think we should be out promoting what it means to work in the resources sector and have a good job that pays well. This is how Australians pay for their mortgages. It's how they pay for their new cars and put their kids through school. So as I said earlier, it's an industry they should be proud of. I'm certainly proud of it, and I want to hear it scream from the rooftops.
Well, I think that there's real motivation and groundswell from the industry to do that, because often it takes being in a bit of a squeeze and a bit of a bind, like we are at the moment in terms of looking down the pipeline for workforce and skills and attracting the types of people that we want to innovate to be able to take us through this, this energy transition. The industry is going to be the place that solves a lot of the issues that we have about an energy transition. And you can't do that without attracting people that are going to innovate and challenge the status quo. So I really feel there's a groundswell, and hopefully Australians recognised what the industry has done over the pandemic in terms of keeping, as you said at the beginning, the lights on. So I hope that momentum continues. But I want to talk about one other policy area for a moment, because it is something that from an operational perspective and from a workforce perspective, it makes a big difference to how industry operates. And that's late last year, the Productivity Commission released its final report into resources sector regulation. And there were some significant recommendations that the government could implement to build confidence and trust in regulation of the sector across the wider community, particularly things like approvals, environmental regulations, etc. Keith, can you tell us a bit about what you think has come out of that report that will make a difference and that the government be able to take forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just on your previous comments, necessity is a great motivator. And right now, there's need. As I think
Yes.
people are very focused and the mind is very much sharpened towards what needs to happen. The Productivity Commission, and I'm not being flippant, I mean, they issue a lot of reports. They make some good recommendations. They make some which, to be frank, I think are nonsense. They also make some which are very difficult to achieve.
Right.
Our federation requires the states to be on board for a number of these recommendations, but the ones that we are working on at a federal level, in the short term, particularly around the environment and the regulation that industry and projects need to deal with. I mean, this idea that you have to get a state and a federal approval through all the environmental regulation for what is effectively the same, apart from, there's a couple of key differences. Well, that's just more cost for nothing. So we are looking to ensure we can get bilateral agreements in place with the states and territories. So you do have that one-stop shop option for new projects. The numbers are out there, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I mean, the costs in Australia are probably 3 times what they are for other countries in terms of capital, particularly for construction. Now, there's lots of people who are very happy to pay overs because we're a very stable, politically stable country where it's pretty open in terms of what the regulations are and what needs need to be met, what workforce is available and how safe your money is. And all of those things are certainly a good motivation for investment in Australia. But we do need to make sure we're not overrun by red and green tape. We have some of the strongest environmental regulations in the world the industry has to comply with. But that doesn't mean that you should have to do it twice. It certainly doesn't mean we should extend more costs for industry for new projects. So we're very focused on some of those changes. I've had a number of discussions with my state counterparts about some of the other recommendations, which do live with the state. It's their purview as per the constitutional requirements. And to get those things done well, we need to strike an agreement. And one of the other parts of my portfolio is of the Federal Minister for Water. So I get the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which is an agreement between 6 key stakeholders in terms of states and territories. And I know just how challenging it is to strike agreements across the country. So look, we're focused on a response to the Productivity Commission's report. There are a number of items which we're already pushing on with, but they take time and some of them are quite significant, and we do need the states to be on board.
I think that's such an interesting comment at this point in time, because through the pandemic, you could potentially say that Australians have become more aware of the different jurisdictions and how states and the Commonwealth interact. Even just, how managing borders through the pandemic, never have Australians been more aware of the challenges of a federated model. And here we are talking about the Productivity Commission recommendations for regulation in the industry, which a number of them rely on the Commonwealth and the states to align. And Prime Minister Morrison has come out and said that we absolutely require recognition of trades across the states. That is such a welcome announcement for our industry, as it has been an absolute burden having tradies, electricians like you were yourself, having to be verified and to have their qualifications recognised in each different jurisdiction. Do you think the pandemic has brought all of that to the fore? Like you said, necessity is the mother of invention.
Oh, look, I was involved when there was an attempt at this. It was probably almost 2 decades ago.
Yes, it's not a newie.
In a previous life. And it's not just the states. You need the unions on board and all of the licensing bodies, particularly on those licensed trades. So whether it is electricians or plumbers or otherwise, and I know we didn't quite manage to get there 2 decades ago, but this is one country. We're not an amalgamation of bits and pieces. We are a single country. We are Australia. Look, I've been critical of the premiers. They've made decisions which were very popular. I acknowledge that completely. But I have been critical of the fact that they've made a number of Australians refugees in their own country. I don't think that's acceptable. However, we've done what we've had to do. We are working our way through the pandemic, and there's an opportunity now for us all to do better if we can just get on board. But to quote Paul Keating, there's quite a few recalcitrants.
Well, I think on that note about We Are One Australia, and I certainly know that as AMA brings together our stakeholders, working together and collaborating is such a privilege in this industry as people are so pragmatic and focused on good outcomes. I think that's a great point to finish the podcast. So thank you, Keith, so much for joining us today on Resource People Podcast.
Look, it's great to be with you, and I'll stay focused on getting stuff done and doing stuff that works.
Thanks on behalf of the Industry Minister.
Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining us on Resource People Podcast today with our chat with Minister Pitt. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any suggestions of who you would like Resource People Podcast to interview, perhaps featuring yourself or someone from your organisation or someone you know in the industry that's doing fantastic work that you'd like to highlight, please send an email to us at media, media, at amma.org.au. We'd love to hear from you. AMA acknowledges and pays respects to the traditional custodians of the land from which Resource People Podcast was recorded today, both the Turrbal and the Yugara people. AMA acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land in which you are living, learning and listening to this podcast from today. We pay our respects to elders, both past, present and emerging.
Thank you for listening to the Resource People podcast. We look forward to you joining us next time as we highlight the many great stories of the resources and energy industry. If you have any questions about the podcast, please email media@amma.org.au. Produced by Brad Thompson.